Okay, if I can have everybody's attention now, about ready to get started again. Thank you. All right, about ready to get started again. Our next speaker is Roger Roots from Lysander University, and he's going to proudly present Government and the Sham of Access to Public Land. And without further ado, here's Roger.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Yeah, my name is Roger Roots. I'm from Montana. I'm the founder of Lysander University, which is mostly an online libertarian blog at the moment. I hope to turn it into an actual block and mortar university in the future. First university of its kind. I also want to say that I'm an attorney. I've worked on the Bundy defense teams, both in Oregon and Nevada. We've had some great success. And I'm also an outdoorsman myself. In fact, I probably would make an open challenge here that I generally spend more nights a year in a sleeping bag than almost anyone. I'm a backpacker. I like to climb mountains, or at least try to climb mountains. I love to hike and fish and whitewater raft, and I probably spend more days off in the great outdoors than anyone else I know, at least on my days off. I've got a little PowerPoint presentation, and I will go ahead and have my PowerPoint presentation control man flip to the next screen. My topic is the sham of access to public land. That's an image of Chris Christie, governor of New Jersey. And some of you may know that that photo was taken at a time when the beaches of New Jersey were closed to the public because there was a government shutdown in the state of New Jersey, a budget impasse of some kind. And the governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, was, they said, seated like a beached whale on the beach. He literally was the only person allowed on that beach, he and his family. So they came out on the beach, they actually had cops telling the public they could not use the beach, even though it was a public beach, because the state was at a budget impasse and was shut down temporarily. So this is what really is the essence of access to public lands. It's all about control. It's about government control over public lands. And what happened to Annette and Victor Fuentes here on this property is all about control. What happened when the government misdirected and diverted their river and their stream out here over onto the wildlife refuge and diverted it around this private property was all about control. Has absolutely nothing to do with saving any fish or saving any endangered species. In fact, all evidence shows that act probably damaged the endangered species, the fish in this case. Next slide, please. This is actual BLM website right now. If you go on the BLM website, they talk about unparalleled access to the outdoors, and it's all a sham because. Go ahead and click to the next one. I'm just going to go through some of the examples that we have around us here. That's some BLM land right there. That's BLM controlled land, not far from us. That's Gold Strike Canyon. Anyone been to Gold Strike Canyon? It's over there on the other side of Las Vegas, very near the Colorado River. It's actually closed in the summertime. This is what they call access to public lands. Closed in the summertime. There's all kinds of signs saying that you'll be arrested if you hike that trail in the summertime because, you know, there's the danger of heat stroke. There's heat. It's too hot. And so you'll be arrested. And there's signs everywhere. And by the way, there's another hot spring trail on the other side of the river called the Arizona Hot Springs. Same geothermal fissure system there. And it is also closed in the summertime to hikers. You'll be arrested if you go there. Next slide, please. That is the Monument Valley, Utah. Very beautiful. We've seen it in a lot of Western movies. Anybody ever been there?
Yes.
You're actually barred from actually walking close. You can't walk around any of those structures. I've been there myself and I was shocked. You can take a picture about that far out, but you're not allowed to even walk around those structures. There's no trails. There's all kinds of signs saying that you'll be arrested if you get close, and there's patrols and surveillance cameras everywhere. Next slide, please. This is the Grand Canyon. Now, I love the Grand Canyon. I'm often in the Grand Canyon. There are so many rules and regs in the Grand Canyon. If you go overnight inside the Grand Canyon, you're supposed to get a permit, backcountry permit, and of course there's only so many given out. You have to apply in advance. By the way, not too far in advance. There's a particular window, and if you apply too far in advance, you're blocked. If you apply too close to the date, you're also blocked. And you have to tell the government exactly where you're going. They actually have forms where they want your footprint size, supposedly under the ruse that they want to be able to find you if you get lost. It's all a scam. I actually had just put my sleeping bag, very lightweight sleeping bag, in a day pack so that I appear like a day packer. And I believe I'm not the only one. You see people walking around. The common practice is to go around inside the Grand Canyon with a day pack with a sleeping bag. I've actually been confronted at the bottom of the Grand Canyon by an armed park ranger with a weapon on her hip, and she says, "Where did you come from? Where are you going?" I said, "I'm a day hiker. I came from the South Rim." She wanted to know what time I left and everything. Oh, she said, "You're a pretty good hiker." I said, "Yes, I am. Thank you very much." But this is what they call access to public lands. Next slide. Red Rock Canyon, we all know it well. You know, they close it every night at what, 5:30, 6, 7 o'clock. You're barred from parking there overnight, barred from hiking in there overnight. I'm not even sure you can get backcountry permits at Red Rock. One person is shaking his head yes, but there's so many rules and regs there, and there's armed BLM running around with body armor. They've actually shot and killed people there who moved wrong or took a step in the wrong direction. Next slide. This is the worst one I can even think of. Mesa Verde National Park. Anyone seen this? Mesa Verde National Monument? I believe it's in southern Colorado. This is shocking because if you actually go there, you can only get about a half a mile from it. Anybody been there? You literally have to look through a telescope at that. You're not allowed to go down there. You're not allowed to take a trail down anywhere, even approaching those Pueblo structures. Again, there's surveillance, cameras everywhere, agents with body armor, automatic weapons, the whole bit. This is what the public calls access to public lands. Next slide, please. This is a place I'm very familiar with in Montana. It's called the Boiling River. It's part of Yellowstone National Park. I live very near there, maybe 50 miles north of there. It's a great place. If you look at that picture, that's the Boiling River joining the Gardner River. The Gardner River is freezing cold. The Boiling River is boiling hot. And you try to sit and find a nice mixture of hot and cold there. It's a great place, especially when it's freezing in the wintertime. You can sit and soak in the great hot springs. As of right now, it's completely closed to the public. It's almost every time I drive by there, it's closed, or there's too many people there, ironically. So it's either a combination of too many people, and you can't find a place in the parking spot, or it's just closed for one reason or another. They say that it's eroding too badly, or it's too high, the water's too high, too low. Whatever. Next slide. This is Mount Rainier. I'm a high pointer. I'm one of these guys that tries to climb the highest point in every state. I think I'm up to about 45 or 46 high points myself.
Wow.
I've tried and failed to climb Mount Rainier, at least 3 or 4 or 5 times. Last time I tried to climb it was with Neil Wampler, actually, when he was on trial in Oregon up there, along with Ryan Bundy. Neil Wampler and I tried to climb Mount Rainier, and we only got about halfway up. But the point there is, the rules and regulations are so severe that they actually put the public at risk, great risk. You have to apply in advance, pay a big permit fee. You have to tell them who you're with, where you're going, what route you're going to take. And of course, you know, for a guy who's not been there, you don't even know what route is best. And when you try to apply by yourself, they usually deny you because you're supposed to go in groups. And so you try to find other hikers, other climbers, and it's not always easy to do. But you're almost always barred from going by yourself. It actually puts you at great risk because you end up trying to bag the peak, which is, of course, the highest point in the state of Washington. You end up trying to bag it in the dark or in the middle of the night with a flashlight or whatever. And of course, it's, again, the same scenario. Constant surveillance, cops everywhere, body armor, machine guns, helicopters. Next slide. There's this immense culture of a narrative. There's a cultural narrative about access to public lands and how great the public lands and all the great economic benefits are. This is an organization called the Outdoor Industry Association, which puts out an annual report about all the money that outdoor recreation raises. $887 billion annually the outdoor recreational industry raises. Of course, most of you know the GDP of the country is about $16 billion. So they're essentially claiming that somewhere between 5 and 10% of U.S. GDP is outdoor recreation. Hard to believe, but if you look into their so-called study, they count every pair of Nike's shoes as the outdoor industry. They count every boat sold as the outdoor industry. Every four-wheel drive is part of the outdoor recreational industry. Anyway, we could quibble with the study, but if you live in the West, like we all do, you're frequently treated to a newspaper story about every year by every one of these agencies, BLM, Forest Service, National Park Service, etc. Every year they put out a study saying something, and the headline will run in every newspaper about all the billions and millions of dollars that the local national park brings into the local economy in Montana or here in Nevada. And of course the BLM will put out another one saying that millions of dollars were brought in by this piece of public land. And of course, if you really look closely, it's tricks. It's use of tricks of rhetoric to achieve this so-called economic bottom line. Obviously, when you really think about it, if you're going to do an economic study, the cost of the staff of the BLM, the cost of the staff of the Forest Service, the National Park Rangers, if you're going to say they're providing a service, then their salaries would have to be on the expense part of the ledger. Those would be losses. Those would be liabilities. They'd be expenses. And yet, those salaries are listed as part of the economic benefit, when in fact they should be on the subtraction line. And again, I can quibble all day long. Well, the one thing they don't do is they don't account for lost opportunity costs. They don't tell the reader of the annual report in the newspaper what that piece of land would have brought had it not been controlled by the National Park Service. If it was sold to the highest bidder, if it was used for ranching, logging, mining, they don't give you the lost opportunity costs. Next slide. I'm a recurring libertarian candidate. I'm currently a candidate for Montana Clerk of the State Supreme Court in Montana, libertarian candidate. And I've run for U.S. Senate as a libertarian candidate, Montana Secretary of State, etc. One problem is a lot of people don't know what a libertarian is, and they say, "What's the Libertarian Party?" And I often get into arguments with the hierarchy of the Libertarian Party, the people in charge of the party. And they use these wishy-washy terms. They say things like, well, we're conservative economically and we're socially liberal, something like that. Well, most people don't even know what this means. I always say, listen, if we just were honest with the voters that we are the party that hates government the most, we would start winning elections by landslides. But anyways, I'm frequently met with the question, well, what about public lands? Would you give away, sell off, sell off all these public lands? Would you sell Yellowstone National Park to the highest bidder? You want privatization of all these public lands? And my answer is always sort of, libertarians have a hard time dealing with this because frankly it's a loser for our party. So we deal with it in different ways. I deal with it like this. I say, well, listen, Yellowstone National Park is in no danger. The Grand Canyon is in no danger. It's not going to be subplatted and zoned out for condominiums. It's not going to happen. There's no possible political scenario in which that's going to happen. Now, on the other hand, there are vast tracts of public land that shouldn't be public land. They, in fact, should be auctioned off to the highest bidder. You know, there are national parks that exist solely because they were in a state where that state had no national park, and they wanted to create one. So they looked around, well, what can we do? There are places in the Midwest called national grasslands. If you look carefully, they're just old ranches that went bankrupt at one time or another and were lost to the county, and then the county gave them to the state, and the state gave them to the federal government. You can see this all over the place. They call it national grasslands. Yes, the answer is I don't see a great value in having, such and such national grassland in Nebraska, Kansas, whatever. Next slide. On the other hand, there is the worst case scenario, Jeremoth Hill. This is the highest point in Rhode Island. Now, I actually lived in Rhode Island. I know a lot about Rhode Island. I went to law school in Rhode Island. Jeremoth Hill, the highest point in Rhode Island, where I have bagged. I've summited, 812 feet. It's actually very close to the highway, but it's on private land, or at least when I was there, it was on private land. And the worst case scenario probably happened at Jeremoth Hill in 2000. Go ahead and click to the next one. 2002. A couple of high pointers who were trying to bag the highest point in Rhode Island walked off the highway, walked onto the private land 100 feet or 200 feet to where the marker is for the highest point in Rhode Island. The landowner, or maybe it was the landowner next door, came out and brandished a shotgun, fired a shotgun in the air, and had him, lay on the ground. Police were called. I actually sympathized greatly with both of them. I sympathized greatly with the hikers, and I sympathized with the landowner, because they shouldn't have to have trespassers jumping over the fence and trying to bag the little marker, the highest point in the state of Rhode Island. But at the same token, I guess, I think the market is the best way to solve that problem. After all, if you really own the highest point in your state, number one, it's probably of value to you to exploit it as much as you can. And I'm sure that guy could probably make a buck or two. I've been to the highest point in, I believe, North Dakota, where they have a tip jar. Yeah. Tip jar at the trailhead. Yeah. Hey, private land, would you chip in $5 to park here and go there, or you can do other things. You could build a 12-foot high chain link fence with barbed wire if you really didn't want high pointers visiting your private land. There's all kinds of things the market could do. Capitalism and freedom is the solution. It's not the most perfect situation in the world. It's just better than every other option in the world. And ultimately, the market solved that problem in Rhode Island. It was sold to another private landowner who now is much more tolerant of high pointers who want to bag the highest point in Rhode Island. And they allow visitors to come on and go up the trail and say and have a selfie at the highest point in Rhode Island. Next slide. I'm also reminded of the Grand Tetons. Some of you may know that the Grand Tetons used to be owned by the Rockefellers. And the Rockefellers donated the whole place to the federal government, and that's why it's now Grand Teton National Park. If you look at the history, the Rockefellers, as far as we know, never chased off any high pointer with a shotgun or any of those mountain climbers during the 20s or 30s or 40s when they owned that piece of land. There were hikers all the way through there. By the way, I've climbed the highest point there, Grand Teton, 2 or 3 times myself. And so, you know, the point is, there's several points about that story. Number one, I think most of us are familiar with the counter story, where the federal government is claiming ownership and falsely claiming rights to manage land that it never really relinquished to the private sector. But here's an example where the private sector had it in actual deeded and plotted title and gave it to the federal government. So you see all these kinds of different scenarios. Next slide. Fascinating story. If you really look at the history of government property, there was much more greater access to it in the past. This is a book by David Brinkley called Washington Goes to War. It documents the fact that in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, you could go to the White House, there was no armed guard. You could visit, they would give you a tour, and sometimes if they weren't there to give you a tour, and if the president wasn't there, you could sit in the president's chair and bounce up in his chair. With no oversight, no giving identification card, no identification whatsoever. That wasn't that long ago, 80 years ago. You could bounce up and down in the president's chair. Today, there is a surveillance grid protecting the president's chair, the White House. You can't even get near there without having guns pointed at you. And what we really are facing is the overall just growth of the state, the expansion and intrusion of the state in our lives. Next slide. That's the Hope Diamond. An example of something that the government should never own. There's no reason in the world for the taxpayers to own the Hope Diamond. It's ridiculous. It's the stupidest thing in the world. No point to it whatsoever. It's in the Smithsonian Institution, which is government. And if you go there, it's under armed guard. The Hope Diamond is supposedly one of the most valuable gems in the world. And I've been there myself. There's an armed guard there watching you the entire time. You look at it under glass. And yes, I would sell the Hope Diamond to the highest bidder immediately. It needs to be sold.
It was actually donated by Harry Winston's family. He owned it and he donated it.
She actually makes a very good point. Many of these things are actually donated by wealthy people to the government. But again, there's no reason why they need to be owned by the government at all. Like the Grand Teton. Next slide. Anyway, there are so many ways the market could fix the problem without the government controlling everything. The Nature Conservancy. Now here we are, we're probably thinking I'm going to say something bad about the Nature Conservancy. It's an environmentalist group. It's with the left, generally speaking. However, I will say this. It is based on a libertarian model. It is based on a capitalistic model, in that it is based on a model where the private sector pools its resources and purchases sacred, valuable, particularly prestigious places and holds them in trust for people to have access to. This is actually a libertarian model. And so as bad as the Nature Conservancy is, it is actually a libertarian model. It's the one environmentalist group that I would say a libertarian could endorse. Now, of course, in reality, we all know they take over land. Land is donated to them, and then they give it to the state or the federal government. By the way, they do so often because they're forced to because of property taxes. I'm being given the get off the stage mark. One more slide, please. The history of saving endangered species is the history of the private sector doing so. The very first wildlife refuge was private. It was in Pennsylvania, and it saved the eagles and hawks of Pennsylvania. Complete private sector. It doesn't need to be done by government. Next slide, there's the final one about the elephant. Did you know that the second largest refuge for elephants that is saving African elephants is private? It's owned by the private sector. The private sector does such a better job at anything than the government. Often what the government does is destroy things rather than save things. And I would say that right here, we're talking about endangered fish, the pupfish and the dace fish here. They would all be saved overnight, immediately, if you could buy, sell, kill, cook, and eat the fish. They would be saved overnight. Thank you very much.
And Roger is going to introduce, I'm
That's right. It is my special pleasure to introduce our final guest of the night, at least our final speaker. We may have a couple other people who come up with a cameo or two. This next man, I can only say, I could go on and on, but there's very few people who've ever faced a felony charge in their lives. Almost no one has faced 24 felony charges in their lives, all right, and beat them all. And even further, he represented himself. And I sat next to him in the trial in Oregon, and the guy did a better job than almost all the other attorneys there. And he beat 6 counts, felony charges in Oregon, by himself, representing himself. I was paralegal. I helped him out a little bit of legal research. Then he beat 16 counts plus several forfeiture counts down here in Nevada. And of all the Bundy defendants, Ryan Bundy faced more total felony charges than any other defendant, including Ammon Bundy or Cliven Bundy. He faced more than any of them, and he beat every single charge by himself without an attorney. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the next governor of Nevada, Ryan Bundy.
This stand, hey, don't take that too far, I need you.
All right. Sorry about that.
That's my favorite sign.
Exposing my secrets too soon. Oh. Thank you though anyway for your effort. Boy, this stand really does get me up here. So, we started this meeting, let me back up just a little bit. Our founding fathers, they fought a hard and bloody Revolutionary War to gain our freedom. And I know that our leader at that point, or one of our leaders, George Washington, didn't do it on his own. He called upon our Father in heaven many times. And I believe that we should call on him every time we meet. We have failed to do that tonight. I was wondering if we could. Yes. Even though it might be a bit late for starting out with a word of prayer, and might be a bit early for ending with one, I'm wondering if we could do that.
Yes.
And instead of me saying it, Raja, would you feel comfortable coming up here and saying this? No?
We was going to have Victor say the closing invocation.
Okay. All right. Well, allow me, if you will.
Oh, sure.
Thank you, Ryan.
Father in heaven, we come before thee and we give you thanks for thy many blessings. We thank thee for this opportunity to meet. We thank thee for the freedom that thou hast blessed us with. We thank thee for the gospel of Jesus Christ. We thank thee for the bravery and freedom that our founding fathers had to be willing to do whatever it takes to protect our freedom. We thank thee for guiding and leading them. We thank thee for protecting us through all our troubles and trials. And we ask thee that thou would be with us. We are in constant need of thy help. We ask thee that thou would show us the right way to go. We ask thee that thou would lead us. We ask thee that thou would forgive us of our sins, and we might repent. Father in heaven, we love thee, and we're thankful for all that thou hast given to us. In these things we pray, and ask for thy Spirit to be here with us tonight. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Our water is important. Our land is important. Our resources are important. I know that I have spoken on this subject many times, and maybe you've heard me before. But I want to begin again. I want to talk about the importance of sovereignty. And first of all, show of hands. Who understands what that term means? What is sovereignty? There's a few here that don't. Can you give us an answer? What is sovereignty?
It's divine individualness given by God.
Okay. Sovereignty is a divine gift. The sovereignty, he who has sovereignty is in charge. In a kingdom, the king is sovereign. In other words, the king makes the rules, whatever he says goes, and everybody else follows. He's the sovereign. He's the only sovereign in that realm. In an oligarchy, which is a rule by an elite group, the elite group are the sovereign. And nobody else in the land has sovereignty. Okay? The buck stops with them. They make the rules. Now, the marvel of America is that this is a republic. And the sovereignty is with the people. You, each one of you are sovereign. But did you know that? Okay. Our Constitution begins by laying out the sovereignty. The preamble states that we, the people of the United States, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States. We, the people, are the sovereign. The United States, speaking of the government, has no sovereignty. You are the sovereign. The state of Nevada, speaking of the government, has no sovereignty. The sovereignty belongs to you. Now, our sovereignty is exercised through the governments that we establish for the protection of our rights. God created man, and God created this earth, and God placed man upon this earth, and he gave man dominion over the fowls of the air, the fish of the sea, the beasts of the field, the herbs and the trees, and every creeping thing that groweth that's upon the earth. And he gave man the commandment to subdue it, to multiply and replenish upon it. And he gave us these lands and resources for our benefit, for our survival, and for our enjoyment. He gave that to man, to Adam, to Eve. He did not give it to governments or groups or corporations. He gave it to individuals. Now, these rights he gave to man. And because man has rights, then we create government to help protect those rights. Our rights do not come from government. Government cannot grant nor take away rights. They might deprive us of them, as what's happening to the Fuenteses here. But those rights are not granted, nor are they taken by government. Now I want to talk about the founding of this country. And I'm going to go back again to our founding fathers. The Declaration of Independence is an amazing document. You should read it often and try to understand what was really taking place. Because they were under such tyranny at the point that they couldn't longer take it. And they stated that that experience hath shown that all mankind are more disposed to suffer while the evils are sufferable. Okay, things can get pretty hard and we can still handle them. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right and it is their duty to throw off such governments. Okay, is that taking place here today?
Yes.
Does it seem like there is a long train of abuses that's taking place? I mean, that's what we've been talking about all night, right? Okay, and doesn't it seem that there's evidence that there is a design to reduce us under absolute despotism? Okay, that's what's taking place. And so, when that's the situation, it becomes the right. And even greater than the right, it becomes a duty to abolish that form of government and to replace it with a form of government that will secure our future.
May the blood of the old be washed away with the blood of the new.
Yes. Yes. Now, our founding fathers put forth this declaration, and they first of all listed the atrocities that were taking place. And if you read down through this list of atrocities, wow. It looks, many of the very same things are taking place here to us today. And so they had to do something about it. They had to get tough. They say when times get tough, the tough get going. I know I said that wrong, but now they finished off with saying that with a firm reliance on the protection from the divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives and our fortunes and our sacred honor. Clive Bundy said, "I'll do whatever it takes." The government took that as a threat. I wonder if King George took this as a threat. He obviously did. He sent his armies. And that's what happened to us too. They sent their armies to us. At least 200 of them. But our founding fathers, they fought. And again, they didn't fight alone. They fought with the providence, divine providence. And I believe that it was by the power and strength of our Father in heaven, the little ragtag armies of the United States, and I correct myself there because they weren't the armies of the United States, they were the armies, they were the militia mostly of each and individual colony that declared themselves independent, free independent states. But they were fighting against the greatest, most powerful military force known at that time, the British Army, the British Empire, of which they said the sun never set upon that empire because they had lands all around the world. And yet this little ragtag army was able to prevail. That doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't even happen by strategy. That happens by divine providence.
Amen.
Roger Roots just gave me great accolades. And that didn't happen by my abilities. I had lots of help from others, but mostly I sought and had help from my Father in heaven. We cannot be free if we do not call upon God. He is the provider of our liberties, and He will be the one who preserves our liberties. We must respect Him, respect His commandments. Now, our founding fathers prevailed. And I'm going to read one more part from the Declaration of Independence. Because here is what they really did. With the Declaration of Independence, they listed the atrocities, they listed some principles and how men are created equal, and there's some awful good things in there. But the real meat of the Declaration of Independence is the actual declaration. It's in the last paragraph towards the first part of it. And they say that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other things which independent states may of right do. Okay, so that's the actual declaration. Before all this, they were called colonies. And you see the transition right here in this document. They say we ought to be free and independent states. And from that point on, they are never referred to as colonies again. They're referred to as states. Free and independent states. And they had to back that up with that war. Okay? So what is a free and independent state? What does that mean, to be free and independent?
Shall not be governed by anyone else.
It shall not be governed by anyone else. That's a good definition. Okay? There's a lot of characteristics that the original 13 states had. And that's one of them. Thank you. But I want to ask, after the Revolutionary War, and it was won by these now free and independent states, how much of the land do you believe that Great Britain retained ownership of within each independent state?
It was sold back to them in 1934 as foreign interests.
Okay, so say that again.
It was sold back to them as foreign interests. That's how we kickstarted the Social Security program.
Okay, well, we're not talking about later on now. I'm talking about right at the point of winning the war for independence. How much of the land within each state did Great Britain retain? Zero. It would be ridiculous to believe that we would just fight a war after making this declaration and allow them to retain any property there. Okay, so one of the characteristics of the free and independent states now is that all of the land and her resources and other rights, as you mentioned, belong to the state and her people. All of it. Now, our founding fathers intended to unite. But at that point, those free and independent states were separate countries. Again, we talk about definition. What's the definition of a nation? What's the definition of a state? A state is a nation. A nation is a state. And so I would suggest to you with that definition that today this is not one nation under God, as we say in our Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, this is not one nation. This is 50 nations currently. Now we are united for common causes and purposes, which are outlined in the Constitution for the United States. But we are not one nation, we are 50. At that point, after the Revolutionary War, there were 13 independent nations. Now, proof of this comes in the peace treaty that was signed after the Revolutionary War. That peace treaty is called the Treaty of Paris, because it was first signed in Paris. So I want to ask, how many states signed that treaty? Does anyone have an answer?
9.
Or 14? Okay. So we can assume that the 13 original states all signed it. So who would have the 14th state been?
DC. District of Columbia.
DC didn't exist. Great Britain. The state of Great Britain. Okay, now why is that important? Okay, that is important because the peace treaty wasn't between two countries. It wasn't between Great Britain and the United States. It was between 14 countries. Each of the new declared and proven through war and blood 13 independent states and the state of Great Britain. Okay? That document alone, seeing this 14 signatures on there, proves that each one was separate and independent. Okay? Now, it was their design to unite, and they first of all did under the Articles of Confederation, and then later they improved that under the Constitution for the United States. The Constitution creates the federal government. It tasks it with certain duties to perform, and then enables it with the power to perform those duties. And that's it. And that's what is told in the 10th Amendment. That we, the people, the sovereign, delegate some of our authority to a federal government to take care of these certain things. And that federal government is primarily supposed to deal with external affairs, things outside of the Union, to deal with war, with peace, with foreign commerce, with dealings with the other states of the world. It's not supposed to be dealing with the things so much within the states. It's not supposed to come down into the states and to control the states or its people. We did give it authority to resolve disputes between the states and resolve disputes between members of one state and another state, perhaps. But they're not supposed to control the states, and they're not supposed to control the people. Okay? The only legitimate function for government on any level is to aid the individual in claiming, using, and defending your rights. And your first and foremost right is your right to life. The second is your right to liberty. The third is the right to pursue happiness, which includes the ownership and control of property. So now let's talk about future states that were made. Our founding fathers can see that there would be new states coming into to be formed and could join the Union. And there was a lot of discussion about that. How are these new states going to be formed? There was argument. If you guys read through the Articles of Confederation, I'm sorry, I'm getting off. Read through the Federalist Papers. If you read through the Federalist Papers, you can start to see their argument, start to see what they were trying to discuss. You can figure out their original intent. They had a lot of discussion upon these new states. What are these new states going to be? Some of them wanted to say, oh, all the new states are going to be subservient, or they're not going to be as great as, they're going to be less than these original states. That way these original states maintain some power. But no, you're right. He's shaking his head, no. Okay, because there was some of the founders who said, if these states are not equal in every way, then either they will not join the Union or they will quickly revolt from it.
They were granted the supremacy clause.
Okay? The equality of the states, they had to be equal. They had to be equal or it just wouldn't be right. Now, they didn't want these new states to become greater than, and so therefore they made some parameters and size and a few things like that. But when it was all said and done, each new state was supposed to be equal in every way to the original 13 states in all their rights and privileges. So now when we talk about land ownership again, we're talking about how much land did the Great Britain retain? Zero. So how much land can the federal government own within a new administrative union? Zero. All right. Now, these lands that were acquired, and there were several different acquisitions of land across the continental America. They had some land that we called the Northwest Territories. That land was already claimed by some of the original 13 states. They relinquished claim on that land to allow it to be turned into new states. So that was the first. And then we have some other acquisitions from Spain, where we got Florida and some of those southern portions of the country. We had the Louisiana Purchase. Texas came in. And of course, we had the Mexican-American War, which ended up in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is what acquired these lands that we're on. And then, of course, there was the Oregon Territory. There was a couple other small ones that took in a few pieces of ground. But this new territory, this new land, they were not states as of yet. And so our founding fathers put in Article 4 of the Constitution that Congress can make the needful rules and regulations respecting those territories, but also that they had the right to dispose of those territories. In other words, back to the 10th Amendment, if we did not give the federal government right to do something, then they don't have it. Is that what the 10th Amendment says?
Yeah.
So, has anyone read within the Constitution any place where they have the right to retain land?
It's also under the 10th Amendment.
Yes, correct.
Forts.
Okay,
Forts.
ports. Well, let me go through that. I'll go through that in just a second. Right here, you're right on line. Thank you. Okay, so the federal government, we did not give them authority to retain land. They only had authority to dispose of it. And dispose of it means to get rid of it. So these territories, they can make the needful rules and regulations on it, but if they have to get rid of it, then we know that that's a temporary situation. Temporary. It doesn't necessarily give timelines, but we know that it's temporary. They have to dispose of it. And so the means and methods of disposal are, first of all, they can sell it. And they can give it away. We know that there was such acts as the Homestead Act. Okay, that's a method of disposal. But the ultimate method of disposal is turning it into states. Okay. And once a land becomes a state, everything changes. It's no longer a territory. Congress no longer has authority over it. It now belongs to the people of that state as a sovereign state, as a sovereign people. And 100% of the land and the resources belong to the people in that state. Now, you mentioned that the federal government can own military bases, forts, and ports. And if you've ever, I know that you guys know the Bundys. I may be preaching to the choir, and you maybe you're tired of hearing this stuff. But Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 allows the federal government to petition a state legislature for the purchase of land, which then can be used for military bases, arsenals, dockyards, magazines, and other needful buildings. And that's it. Let me ask you, is there any place within the Constitution that allows the federal government to own or control water?
No.
What's going on here, I wonder?
Unconstitutional.
That's right. Okay.
They're breaking the law.
They're breaking the law. Now, Nevada has some good water laws. And if I understand right, Nevada water engineer is standing behind the Fuentes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Partially, and we're working the rest of that out, I understand.
Hoping to raise money for water court litigation.
And see, I wonder, is it really necessary that we should go through court?
No.
Isn't the documentation and the history enough?
Yeah.
Since when do we need someone else to make another decision on it?
No.
Is there any decision to be made at all, being that there is no constitutional right for the federal government to own, control water?
No.
Where's the question?
There is none.
Okay. Why shouldn't this dam be taken out first thing in the morning?
Yeah.
If it was up to me, that's where I'd be. But this is the Fuentes property, and they have to make that decision. But if you do, you need a piece of equipment. I've got an excavator.
Amen.
I'll bring it up.
We'll stand behind it.
But I'll let you make that decision. Now, I'm running for governor. And I do this because I understand the proper form of government. And I understand the proper purpose for government. And that throughout the years that we have dealt with these atrocities of the federal government coming down upon us, we have time and time again petitioned our local elected officials to uphold their oath of office, to protect our life, our liberty, and our property. We have noticed them, legal constructive notices, several times. We have said, please, please uphold our rights. I can tell you that you only have rights that you claim.
That's right.
You only have rights that you use. And you only have rights that you defend.
That's right.
If you do not do all three, then you will lose your right, or not have one at all to begin with. Okay? You can't have a right you don't claim. If you don't claim it, I guess you don't want it. It's not yours. You must not have a right. If you don't use it, well, if you had a right but you're not using it, well, I guess it's no value to you, and therefore you must not want it. And if you don't defend it when the time is right, then you will lose it because you don't defend it. And the Fuentes is here. They claim their right. They used their right, and they're in the process of defending their right. But I'm also warning them that they need to put it back to use. Because if they don't, they might lose it on that premise. I'm ready to bring up the sign. You've all seen the photographs or the signs that show the red versus the white with the federal ownership, and where it shows that the federal government owns roughly, or claims to own roughly 90% of the state of Nevada. Well, when I'm governor, I will correct that. This is Nevada land, and people will be welcome to come here and to enjoy it, and this will be done by the people. BLM signs will come down, Nevada signs will go up. Okay? And I'm not going to ask their permission. I don't think they have a permit for that anyway. Somewhere, I don't know if you can see it, somewhere at the hole.
Put it up over the BLM sign.
But I will be within the parameters of the supreme law of the land when I do so. When we do so.
Yeah.
Because I will be your servant. And I will uphold my oath of office. And if anyone asks for my oath